Hey everybody, Brian Von VA. Not every single day in the whole world can be bright and sunny. Sometimes we gotta focus on those sad moments, which we're doing right now, right here in What's Your Saddest D&D Story? I had a friend I'll just call B. B had cystic fibrosis. From the day I met B, I knew he was smart, artistically talented, and frail. He was scarily thin. His CF made it difficult to breathe. Frequently, he'd be hooked up to a tank of oxygen, and many of his friends kept a tank of oxygen stashed at our homes just in case he needed it. And then a miracle happened. They found a compatible lung donor, and with new lungs, B's life transformed. Color literally came to his flesh, which had always been kind of grayish. He could go for walks, he could keep up with the rest of us, and whatever we did, he could finally enjoy a full life. And about this time, I was starting a D&D campaign, and B was excited to join. I mean, he was really excited. I had a portion of the world map that was wild steppes, and I kinda had the idea of some Mongol-like folks out there. B dove in, helping me flesh out the area and the cultures that lived there. He drew pictures, helped organize the campaign, and get the other players ready to play. The first few sessions were pretty great, and in no small part thanks to B's efforts. Lung transplants, however, are pretty dodgy things. The threat of rejection means the immune system has to be suppressed until the body can accept the new lungs. A bit over a year after getting his new lungs, B got pneumonia. He spent a few days in the hospital hoping he'd be well enough to join in on the next game session. Thankfully, the day before our next session, the doctors released B from the hospital. They put him in a wheelchair and rolled him out to his mother's car. Before they got there, though, he started hacking and coughing. He turned gray. They spun him around and took him right back in, but the infection that had spread through him was too strong. He was dead by the end of the day. None of us had the heart to continue playing that campaign without B, as there was just too much of him in it. A month ago on Roll20, I started a new campaign. I had listed in my requirements, I'm looking for players 22 and older because of immature behavior and young guys hitting on female players. You know, the whole typical trope. So in the forums, I get a response from this guy who says, look, I have a character. I want to play my character. My character is a paladin and he'll fit into your world. I studied your orientation documents. He would be perfect for your Theocracy campaign. I'm a real good role player. Just give me a chance. So I met him on Discord and he seemed fine. Later on, I learned that he lost his father at a young age. He was just 18 and he told me that up front, so I said, sure, I'll let you join. He joined and played a very compelling character. We played that first session, and at the end of that session, everything was cool. A few days later, though, we get a message from him that his mother has died. And now he is orphaned. And he needs to drop the game because he needs to find a place to live and get a job. He said he knows he's not going to have any time to play, and for the good of the campaign, he's going to have to drop out. He left, and we kept his character in abeyance. We all wished him well. Real life. Not one of the characters that we play. This is real drama. There are no hit points. One of the saddest D&D stories in a long time. And we hope that he actually had a good life after this, and may his parents be looking down on him happily from wherever they are traveling the cosmos. Female player here. In the summer between my sophomore and junior years of college, I was invited to play in a game with a bunch of guys I knew from the computer department I worked for, and with whom I had played on an online dungeon game on the local mainframe, one of the first multiplayer online dungeon games available. The GM was a guy who graduated but was still around, working for the department, and the other two were seniors. So we all get into a room and make our first edition characters. I was playing a half-elf ranger, female, and the other two were playing a dwarf fighter and a gnome illusionist. Ahead of time, the GM did warn it was going to be an RP-heavy game. That's perfectly fine, said I. I'd been running my own AD&D game for my friends for a few years already. I started GMing with the Red Box when I was about 12 or so. 8 real-time hours later, we had all finally gotten our equipment. In order to get her equipment, leather armor and a sword, my character had to actually agree to marry each of the other PCs. And in order to get the equipment for the road, she'd had to agree to marry the son of the general store owner. Well, we finally got on the road and reached our first combat. The GM then breezed over all my ranger abilities so that the critters got surprise on us. I finished out the combat and suddenly I remembered, wink wink, that I had to get the car home to my parents and just left. I think I threw my character sheet in the trash on the way out of the building. Whenever I meet other women who played one of the D&D games from years ago but never again, I know exactly what happened to them. Thank heavens I'd already been playing the game before that, or I'd have never gone back. I will add that I did all my online dungeon crawling alone after that and never asked to party with those guys again. When I was around 16, right at the time the first ever gaming store in my area showed up, and I began meeting with new people to play D&D outside of my classmates, most of whom had moved on from the game entirely by then, a game of Star Wars, the old D6 system of Star Wars, was formed. In the store, the way we played was that, since there were a lot of players, groups would form up with whoever wanted to join. Some DMs were more accepting of players than others, but no one was entirely turned away. There was this one kid who joined in. I can't remember his name. No one I know who played there does. He basically had no name. He was just referred to as Orange Shirt Guy on account of his orange shirt, which he seemed to wear every single day. He was the type of guy that had never played a TTRPG before, so he would suck at it, and most of us would laugh at how he could never figure out how to play, and more often than not would sit silently at the table watching the rest of us play. Some DMs took this even further, harassing him on his turn, and in one instance, one DM, who was a dick in general to be honest, decided to just skip him during the whole session, not even bothering to include him in the actual game when he was technically playing with us. Well, eventually, he stopped showing up at the store entirely, and I didn't hear anything more about him. But I would often remember him. In groups with players from those olden days, we would occasionally think about him and wonder what had become of the Orange Shirt Guy. That was until about 10 years later. That's when I found out that the guy died. He had cancer, it seemed, and no one knew exactly of what. He was gone, dead. For all those years in which we remembered him, he had gone from this world. And no one knew. This man is dead. And I used to mock him without even knowing his name, and to this day, I still don't remember his name. He is just Orange Shirt Guy, who died and no one knew, because none of us had bothered to find out. Here's the story of Whiskey. A few years ago, I ran an RP-heavy campaign, one of the players who played the character Whiskey. She was a drow gunslinger that had a very rough childhood. Whiskey had a daughter, but she felt as though she couldn't give her daughter the life she deserved, and she didn't want her daughter to grow up as she did, so Whiskey gave her away. However, Whiskey would send gold to the family every month, and she'd always receive a letter back from her daughter. As the campaign began to come to a close, the party had to deal with a family of vampires that had been influencing the region for a very long time. They finally had uncovered everything, and most of the city guard had signed on for this as well. They killed the master's 3 children and went into the final room to face the master himself. He sat at the head of a long dining table, and sitting next to him were Whiskey's daughter and a few other loved ones from other players. He explained to them that they would sit and listen, and if they acted out against him, he'd kill the loved ones before they could even have a chance to say goodbye. Most of the party sat except for the fighter, who grabbed his sword and lunged. He missed, and the master incinerated Whiskey's daughter and the others with a snap of his fingers. The fight that happened next was long and ended with 2 of the 4 players dying before Whiskey finally dealing the final blow and killing the master. When the dust settled, Whiskey carried her daughter out of the building, sat down while holding her, and then shot herself. Whiskey's daughter was the only thing she lived for, and with that gone, she did not want to face the world. Years later, and it's one of the saddest player deaths I've ever encountered. It's really hard to control emotions out there, in and out of game, but I think everybody left that table teary-eyed. The death of Trout the Goblin. In our first campaign, the party started by defeating a cavern full of goblins. Pretty standard stuff. A few in-game weeks later, however, they were going back along a path near the Goblin Cave, where they heard an odd crying coming from the forest. It turned out they'd stumbled across a baby goblin, who tearfully explained that her parents had been killed several weeks prior by a gang of bloodthirsty adventurers, probably them. Due to the darkness of the cave, she didn't notice that it was the party, but the party knew what they'd done. Called it! Some felt guilty, others less so, but they eventually agreed to take her with them, and decided not to tell her the truth. Idiots! Now, our necromancer adopted her, and a friend who had been watching the campaign started using a character sheet to play the baby goblin, which was affectionately christened Trout, after the halfling's nephew, Carp. Trout was beloved by most members of the party, but loathed by others, specifically the noble. Jackass! They didn't get along well, tried to kill each other multiple times, and constantly snipped at each other. However, the party did make it through their adventures, and the noble ended up rescuing a dark elf woman from one of the dungeons. They ended up sharing a tent that night, much to the halfling's chagrin. Long story short, the elf was a doppelganger, a monster that could take the form of humans, and ended up stabbing the noble in his sleep. Good for you! After finishing the elf off, the goblin relentlessly mocked the noble's failed conquest. Good for you too. Needless to say, the noble was pissed, but what he did next shocked me, and it was a weird campaign from the beginning. He took poor Trout to the cavern where the whole campaign began, and found the bodies of her parents and revealed that she had been adopted by their murderers. Trout was furious. She attacked the noble with everything she had, but it wasn't a fair fight, seeing as the majority of the party regretfully aided with the noble. So, it was with much regret and one horrified DM that they had to kill their newly adopted goblin child. I hate every single person in this party except the person who played Trout. Trout did it right, everybody else just makes me furious. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Make sure to get your tissues ready. I know that was a sad one, but hey, we love you here at MrRipper. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and of course, let us know in the comments below. You got a sad story you'd like to tell? We're not beneath telling all of it here because we want to make sure everyone feels the vibe. See you next time. Bye for now.